We just had a wild night in hockey. I'm Dan DiPietro. This is the Four League Report. Let me tell you something right now. We just watched one of the most insane hockey games, and I don't throw that word around lightly because hockey's insane to begin with, but the most insane hockey game that I've ever seen in the history of the Stanley Cup Final. You had everything in this game. I mean everything. You had domination. You had a collapse. You had history, real history, not the every night something, is historic nonsense. No, actual record-breaking history. And then you had double overtime where in the end, Vegas just said, enough already. Golden Knights 5, Hurricanes 4. Vegas up 2-1. But that really doesn't tell the story. First period, Carolina's the better team. Simple as that. They're out shooting Vegas. They're controlling the puck. They're dictating the pace. You're sitting there thinking, all right, Hurricanes look like the more organized, more composed team tonight. 7 shots to 2 in the first period, and yet it's nothing. And that's really dangerous against a team like Vegas to come out and play that cleanly and not take advantage of it. You're asking for trouble. So, second period, and this is where the whole game, turns on its head. Vegas gets a nice power play goal. Carolina kind of whiffs and, forgets that Hurdle's there right in front of the net, basically all by himself, and they get beat. So you had a breakdown there, you had loose coverage, and eventually you had pucks going into your own net. That second Vegas goal, that's a deflection off a Carolina stick, bad break. Then Marner steps into it, and his hat trick goal, that's one that kills you because it's not just a great play. It's a puck that thrown to the net that gets deflected off a Hurricane. That's a nightmare scenario. You're already on your heels, and now your mistakes are ending up in your own net. And that's how games get out of control. 3 goals in 6 minutes and 10 seconds. That's the fastest hat trick in Stanley Cup Final history. And it's not just skill, it's compound failure, Vegas execution, and Carolina chaos. It's 4-0 at the end of the second, and man, you're just sitting there and you're like, all right, Carolina's cooked. This one's over. Good night, the lights. But this is why they play the games and finish the games, right? Because, I said it to my wife. I was like, there's just no way. This is over. Vegas is clearly in control now, and they're probably going to be favorites after this game's over to wrap up the series. But here's the detail that matters. Third period, Marner gets the penalty shot in the third, chance for 4 goals, and Bussy, who Carolina puts in the game for Anderson, basically to, say to Anderson, here, man, like, we get it. You're getting absolutely shelled. There's no defense. There's nothing going on in the neutral zone. Everything is Swiss cheese. 4 goals on 16 shots. And granted, he was terrible, right? I think he would tell you that he was terrible, but he certainly didn't get any help. So Bussy comes in, and Marner gets the penalty against him. Bussy with a nice stop. And it's crucial, because if that goes in, there is no comeback, there is no overtime. Instead he keeps it alive. And then, Carolina finally settles down. And then, boom, Martinook scores. And then Hall. And then Stahl. Three goals in 39 seconds. 39 seconds. Fastest 3-goal burst in Stanley Cup final history. And now what happened earlier, the deflections, the own goals, that all flipped psychologically. Because now Vegas is the team gripping the stick. Carolina's rolling, they're swarming, they're winning draws, they're winning everything at the net, and then late power play, traffic, bodies everywhere, chaos, people getting thrown into the net as Svechnikov ties it 4-4, and that building goes silent. And you're sitting there saying, how did we get here? What am I watching here? This is absolutely insane. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I had the same opinion except the other way now, that I said to myself, if Carolina completed the comeback to at least send it into overtime, I can't see him losing. And this is why we keep playing, folks, right? So, overtime period number 1, survival. Momentum, totally in favor of Carolina. But the playoffs don't care about momentum. And we learned this at the end of Game 2 of the NBA Finals, right? The playoffs and big moments and championship moments care about mistakes. Both goalies make big saves, both teams miss chances, and then double overtime. Vegas puts a little bit of pressure. Shea Theodore gets a really lucky bounce and another own goal. A really, really unlucky deflection that ends up off a Bussy's skate. And it's just absolute madness, man. And then so Vegas sends it. But, the real story, what actually happened here? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Vegas had the best player on the ice. Okay, Mitch Marner. He detonated the game. His stretch was historic. I understand that his hat trick, you could put an asterisk because of the own goal. However, that shot to the middle of the ice in front of the crease was really, really nice. He was obviously looking for an apple there. Instead, he gets lucky. Okay, so you have to give him credit for making the smart play there. I understand it's an own goal. But, Carolina, they handed Vegas fuel. Loose plays, deflections, pucks going the wrong way. That second period wasn't just Vegas being brilliant and Marner being brilliant, and it was a lot of brilliance from Marner. It was Carolina feeding the fire. And the crazy thing is, even with 2 plays that turn into own net situations, we're still talking about a Carolina comeback because it tells you everything about their identity as a hockey team. And keep in mind, Keandre Miller, who had the hip flexor, didn't play one shift in overtime. And he had big minutes for them during regulation. So we'll have to keep an eye on his status going forward. I think that he's a difference maker on that end of the ice for Carolina. But Vegas leads 2-1. But don't get comfortable because Carolina now knows they can outplay Vegas. They can overwhelm Vegas. And even when things go completely sideways, they're still right there. In Vegas, they're thinking, we just almost let one of the worst collapses in finals history slip away. And you know, it's just been a wild series. Every game drama, every game late swings, every game something you don't usually see. But game three, this one's different because you had a record hat trick, multiple deflection goals, own goals, one of them basically an own goal for a hat trick, a 4-goal comeback attempt that was very close to being completed by Carolina, a double overtime finish. That's not just a game, folks. That's a night that you're going to remember if you're a hockey fan. If you're a fan of either one of these teams, you're never going to forget tonight. So that's going to wrap up the hockey for tonight. So gonna touch in a little bit on the NBA Finals because, and I don't want to spend a lot of time. The story tonight was the NHL Finals, but all over social media today, you just keep reading and keep hearing the same stuff about how the Spurs are going to own the league one day, and Wemby's going to own the league one day, and, you know, it continues to be the story in the middle of what has been a historic run by the Knicks. And I do think that the public believes that the Knicks are going to win now, but they're still missing the mark. And what I mean by that is everybody keeps talking about Wemby and how he's going to own the league and how young the Spurs are and how good they're going to be. And don't worry, it's going to be a friend. Okay. Maybe you're right. You know, it's tough to argue with that. I think it's important to remember that there have been really, really good players in the past in this league that got there and lost and never went back. And even if they did go back, like Patrick Ewing, they lost again and they never went back again. Allen Iverson, Chris Paul, Reggie Miller, James Harden, Russell Westbrook. Okay, these are some of the best players to ever play in the modern game. And the narrative was constantly surrounding them about what they were going to be, and how they were going to own the league one day. And it just never came to fruition. And I think that instead of continuing this narrative about how, and I know the series isn't over, so I want to be careful here, but it's all the chatter is one way and not the other way. If the Knicks complete this one way or another, whether it's a sweep, whether they win in 5, whether they win in 6, I don't think they would win in 7 if it got to a game 7. Why can't the same be said for them? Because last time I checked, this team has players under contract. The core of their team is under contract going into next season. If they win this thing, New York is going to be a party all summer. As I was saying to you in the last episode, everybody's going to notice, including players who are free agents. Why can't this be the beginning of the Knicks owning the league, at least for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years? You tell me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. there's the mailbag, 4leaguereport@gmail.com. Send me your thoughts on anything going on with the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, the NBA Finals, and I will read them during a mailbag segment. And that is going to be it for tonight. We will be back with you on Tuesday to review more finals action. I'm Dan DiPietro. This is the 4 League Report. We will see you next time.